Picture this, you are running. Not from a beast of fang and claw, but from a curse spoken by your own blood. The words whip at your back more cruelly than the biting wind that tears through your thin dress. A curse spat from the lips of the man who should have been your protector, your father. You are a disgrace, a barren field, too wide and worthless for any man of standing. You'll die alone without sons. His voice, a rasp of thunder and bourbon, echoes in the canyons of your memory, chasing you out of the gilded cage of your home and into the unforgiving wilderness. Every rasping breath you take is a rebellion. Every stumbling step is a declaration. You are Elara Thorne, daughter of Mayor Augustus Thorne, and you have chosen the unknown over the certainty of a gilded misery. The polished floors and silk curtains of your father's mansion were a prison, and the man he'd chosen for you, a weaselly land baron twice your age with eyes like a coyote, was to be your jailer. Your father saw only your frame, the generous curves he deemed a flaw, a mark of indulgence that shamed his name. He never saw the strength in your hands or the fire in your soul. Now that fire is all you have left, a flickering ember against the encroaching cold of the high desert night. The world bleeds into a watercolor of bruised purples and stark blacks. Your lungs burn, your legs are leaden weights, and the hope that propelled you for the first few miles is now a guttering candle flame. A storm, born in the jagged peaks to the west, is rolling down the plains, a great, dark beast of wind and rain. It mirrors the tempest in your heart. You stumble over a loose rock, your ankle twisting with a sickening crack of pain. A cry is ripped from your throat, swallowed by the rising howl of the wind. You collapse onto the hard, cold earth, the world spinning into a dizzying vortex of pain and despair. Is this it? Is this where your father's curse comes true? Alone, broken, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. As your vision tunnels, a single point of light pierces the gloom. Faint golden flicker, a lamp in a window. It seems an impossible distance away, a mirage born of desperation. But it is real. With the last dregs of your will, you begin to crawl. You drag your body through the scrub brush and gravel, the sharp stones tearing at your palms and knees, the golden light your only compass. The first drops of icy rain begin to fall, plastering your hair to your face. The light grows closer, resolving into the square outline of a cabin, a lone outpost of humanity against the raw power of the coming storm. You reach the bottom of the porch steps, your strength utterly spent. Your hand stretches out, fingers brushing against the rough-hewn wood, before the world finally, mercifully, goes black. He found her there, a crumpled heap at the foot of his porch as the sky broke open. Silas was a man carved from the very rock and timber of the mountains he called home. His face was a testament to a hard life, mapped with lines of sun and sorrow, and bisected by a pale, thin scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to the curve of his mouth, a permanent parenthesis of pain. He had come here seeking solitude, a quiet penance for a past he could never outrun. The world of men, with its greed and its noise, held nothing for him anymore. He had lost everything that mattered in that world. So when he saw her, his first instinct was suspicion. A lone woman, dressed in finery now torn and dirted, appearing at his doorstep on the eve of a squall, spelled trouble. But then he saw her face, pale and streaked with mud and tears, and the unnatural angle of her ankle. He saw not a threat, but a broken thing, as lost and battered as his own soul. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he scooped her into his arms. He was surprised by the solidness of her, the reality of her weight, but he carried her with an easy strength born of a life of labor. He laid her gently on the cot near the stone hearth, the firelight casting dancing shadows across her unconscious features. For 3 days, the storm raged outside, and Elara drifted on a feverish sea. Silas tended to her with a quiet, methodical care. He set her ankle, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he bound the splint. He brewed willow bark tea to bring down her fever, coaxing the bitter liquid past her lips. He sat in his chair across the room, cleaning his rifle or mending a saddle, his eyes rarely leaving her. In her delirious moments, she would cry out, fragments of her father's cruelty spilling into the quiet cabin. Worthless? No sons, die alone. Silas would just sit there, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the flames in the hearth, the firelight reflecting a deep, ancient sadness in his eyes. He recognized the language of ghosts, the haunting echoes of a past that refuses to stay buried. When her fever finally broke, she woke to the smell of wood smoke and roasting rabbit. She sat up, a wave of dizziness washing over her. The man was at the hearth, his back to her. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and leather, a silent mountain of a man. He turned as if sensing her gaze, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. The scar was stark, pulling his mouth into a permanent, somber line. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held no judgment, only a deep, weary watchfulness. "You're awake," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like rocks shifting deep underground. It was not unkind. Alara nodded, her throat too dry to speak. He brought her a cup of water, and she drank it greedily. Where am I?" she managed, her voice a hoarse whisper. "My cabin," he answered, his words spare. "You collapsed on my porch." There was a storm. He didn't ask her name or where she came from. He didn't ask why she was running. He simply stated the facts. In the days that followed, a quiet rhythm established itself between them. Silence was their primary language, punctuated by the necessities of survival. He would hunt and chop wood. She, as her ankle healed, would tend the small garden out back, mend his worn shirts with neat, careful stitches and keep the cabin tidy. She learned his habits through observation. He drank his coffee black. He never spoke of his past, and the questions that burned in her throat remained unasked. He had a way of moving through the world with a deliberate quietness, as if afraid of disturbing it. She, in turn, found a peace in the simple, repetitive tasks. For the first time in her life, she was valued for what she could do, not for who she could marry or what heir she could produce. Here, her worth was measured in the straightness of her sewing, the heartiness of the stews she learned to cook, the gentle way she tended the struggling tomato plants. Silas watched her, too. He saw the way she would pause in her work to watch a hawk circling in the vast blue sky, her expression one of wistful longing. He saw the innate kindness in the way she would leave seeds out for the sparrows. He saw the strength in her soft curves, a resilience that had carried her through an ordeal that would have broken many others. He had long ago forgotten what the warmth of another person's presence felt like in his home. He had chosen this isolation, this silent exile, because he believed he deserved it. But Ilara's presence was not an intrusion. It was like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night, soft, tentative, but undeniably there. One evening, as they sat by the fire, a comfortable silence stretching between them, she finally found the courage to speak. "My name is Ilara," she said softly, her gaze on the dancing flames. He nodded slowly. Silas, it was a simple exchange, but it felt monumental. It was the first brick laid in the foundation of a bridge between their two solitary worlds. She told him her story then, not all at once, but in pieces over several nights. She spoke of her father's ambition, his coldness, the suffocating opulence of her former life, and the terrible curse he had laid upon her. She spoke of her escape not as an act of bravery, but of sheer desperation. Silas listened without interruption, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. When she finished, her voice thick with unshed tears, he was silent for a long time. She feared she had burdened him, driven him away with the ugliness of her past. "He was wrong," Silas said finally, his voice low but firm. The words were so simple, yet they landed in her soul like a healing balm. Strength isn't measured in sons or titles. It's measured here. He tapped his chest gently with 2 fingers, right over his heart. "You have it. More than you know." That night, Ilara cried herself to sleep, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of release, of being seen and validated for the first time in her life. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a sanctuary. The solitary man was no longer a stranger. He was a guardian. The weeks turned into a month, then two. The sharp edges of their loneliness began to soften in each other's presence. Laughter, a sound long absent from the cabin, began to echo off the timber walls, quietly at first, then with more confidence. He taught her how to track, how to read the clouds, how to live in harmony with the wild land. She taught him how to hope again. She planted wildflowers around the cabin, bright splashes of color against the stark landscape. She brought a light into his life he thought had been extinguished forever. One afternoon, he returned from checking his trap lines to find her humming as she kneaded bread dough, her face dusted with flour. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, a rare occurrence that made the scar on his face seem less a mark of pain and more a part of his story. He found himself wanting to protect that fragile piece, to build a wall around their small world and keep the ugliness of the past at bay. But the past is a patient hunter, and it had not forgotten Alara Thorne. One day, a lone rider appeared on the distant horizon, a dark speck against the setting sun. Silas saw him from the ridge above the cabin. His body went rigid, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He knew that shape, the posture of a man paid to hunt others. The sanctuary was about to be breached. The world they had so carefully built was about to be torn apart. He descended to the cabin, his face a grim mask. Alara saw his expression, and the bread dough she was holding grew heavy in her hands. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't have to answer. In the tightening of his jaw and the hard, distant look in his stormy eyes, she saw the answer. Her father had found her. The curse was coming to collect. The piece of the cabin shattered like glass. The easy rhythm they had found was replaced by a taut, humming tension. Every snap of a twig in the woods, every cry of a distant coyote, sent a jolt of fear through Alara. Silas became a silent sentinel, his rifle always within reach, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The lone rider was a harbinger, a scout. More would follow. Silas knew the playbook of men like Mayor Thorne. They did not forgive defiance. They crushed it. He could have told her to run, to push on further into the wilderness where they might never find her. But he knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in his gut, that she was done running. He saw it in the firm set of her jaw, in the way she met his gaze without flinching. The woman he had found broken on his porch was gone. In her place was a woman who had discovered her own strength, and she would not surrender it. "They will come for me," she said one evening, her voice steady. It was not a question. "Yes," Silas replied, his voice a low growl. "Then we will be ready for them," she stated, her chin held high. In that moment he felt a surge of fierce, protective pride. He had seen courage before, on battlefields and in dusty frontier towns, but he had never seen anything quite like the quiet, unyielding fortitude of Alara Thorne. His own past, the one he had tried to bury in this isolated canyon, came rushing back. He had been a marshal once, a man who wore a star and believed in the law. He'd had a wife, Anna, and a small boy, Daniel. They were his world. But his pursuit of a ruthless gang had brought violence to his doorstep. He'd been away, tracking them, when they'd come for his family in retaliation. He returned to a home of smoke and silence. The star on his chest became a brand of failure, the weight of his guilt a shroud he could never cast off. He had fled, seeking a place where he could harm no one else, where he could simply fade away. Now Alara's plight had dragged him back into the light. He looked at her, standing by the fire, her silhouette framed by the warm glow, and he saw a second chance. He would not fail again. "I have some friends," he said, breaking a long silence. "People in the valley. They don't care much for the mayor." It was an understatement. Mayor Thorne's reach was long, and his methods of acquiring land and power had left a trail of resentment among the small ranchers and homesteaders. Silas rode out the next morning, leaving Alara with a rifle and a solemn promise to return. She watched him disappear over the ridge, a lone figure against the vast sky, a profound fear mingling with a defiant hope in her heart. She spent the day fortifying the cabin, barring the windows and stacking firewood by the door. She was not a damsel waiting to be rescued. She was a soldier preparing for a siege. Silas returned 2 days later not alone. Behind him rode a small, grim-faced posse. There was old Jed, a rancher whose water rights Thorne had tried to steal. There were the Miller brothers, young hotheads whose father had been run out of town by Thorne's machinations. And there was Sarah, the town's widowed doctor, a woman of quiet steel who had treated more than one person on the receiving end of the mayor's justice. They were not an army, but they were a community bound by a shared grievance. They looked at Alara, not with the judgment she had known her whole life, but with a kind of weary empathy. They saw not the mayor's disgraced daughter, but one of their own, another soul caught in Thorne's web. The confrontation came at dawn. A line of 5 men on horseback crested the ridge, silhouetted against the blood-red sunrise. At their lead was Sheriff Brody, a man whose loyalty was bought and paid for by Thorne's gold. His silver star was a mockery of the law it was meant to represent. They rode down into the canyon with an arrogant swagger, expecting to find a lone man and a terrified woman. They did not expect to see Silas standing on the porch, rifle held loosely at his side, with Jed and the Miller brothers fanned out behind him, their own weapons ready. They did not expect to see the cabin door open and for Alara to step out, a shotgun held firmly in her hands, Sarah standing right beside her. Sheriff Brody reined in his horse, his sneer faltering for a moment. "Silas, I should have known you'd be mixed up in this. We're here for the girl." The mayor's property, the word property, hung in the cold morning air like a poison. Silas took a step forward. "She's not property," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "She's a free woman, and she's staying here." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands on the shotgun were steady. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. She found her voice, and it was clearer and stronger than she had ever imagined it could be. "I am not your property, Sheriff," she called out, her voice carrying across the clearing. "I am not my father's property. My life is my own." One of Brody's deputies shifted nervously in his saddle. This was not the simple retrieval they had been promised. Brody's face hardened, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. "I have a warrant signed by the mayor himself. Now stand aside, Silas, or we'll dash." "You'll what, Brody?" Sarah's voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. "You'll open fire on your own neighbors? On behalf of a man who would see us all ruined for his own gain? Look around you. This isn't just about her anymore." The sheriff's eyes darted from face to face. He saw no fear. He saw only a grim, united resolve. He saw men and women pushed too far, who had finally found a line they would not let him cross. He saw his own men hesitating, their confidence evaporating in the face of this unexpected resistance. The standoff stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the wind whistling through the pines. Brody's bluster was a hollow thing against the solid wall of their community. He was a bully, and his power relied on the belief that his victims would always be isolated, always be afraid. Here, facing this small, defiant family forged in the crucible of shared adversity, his power was meaningless. With a curse, Sheriff Brody yanked on his reins, turning his horse so sharply it reared. "This isn't over," he spat, his threat lacking any real menace. He and his men galloped away, their retreat a cloud of dust and humiliation. Collective breath was released. The Miller brothers let out a whoop of victory. Alara felt her knees go weak, and Silas was there in an instant, his hand on her arm, steadying her. She looked up at him, at the fierce pride in his storm-colored eyes, and knew she was home. The curse was broken. Not by bearing sons, not by winning a man's approval, but by standing her ground and choosing her own family. Her father's power, built on fear and intimidation, crumbled when faced with true courage and community. Word of the standoff spread, emboldening others who had suffered under his rule. His empire of corruption began to collapse under the weight of his own tyranny. The family that stood on the porch of that small cabin that morning was not one of blood, but of choice. It was a family of outcasts and survivors, bound by loyalty and a shared belief in a simple, profound truth, that every person has the right to choose their own life, to define their own worth. Elara and Silas, standing side by side, looked out at the valley, no longer as two solitary souls, but as the heart of a new beginning. So, what is it that truly defines a family? Is it the blood that runs through your veins, or the bonds you forge in the fires of adversity? We are so often told what our worth is by a world that values the superficial, the fleeting, the things that can be measured in gold or land or titles. You might be told you are too much of one thing or not enough of another. Curses, spoken by parents or partners, or even the cruel voice of society, can echo in our hearts, telling us we will end up alone, that we are unworthy of love. But what if true strength, the kind that endures, lies in defying those curses? What if our greatest power is the courage to stand up and declare that our life is our own, and to choose the people we call family? The world may try to put you in a cage, but the key is always, always in your hands. What curses have you had to overcome in your own life? Share your story in the comments below, because every voice that chooses courage over fear makes the world a little brighter. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable power of the human spirit.